tonight to you, 10 to 1. Now, bereaved families will have to pay 3% on late payments of inheritance tax from next month. HM Revenue and Customs has confirmed this. These payments are due within 6 months of a death. Interest on late payments roughly followed. Bank of England base rate fell to 0 in March. Jonathan Davis, Managing Director of Financial Planners, Armstrong Davis, with us again. Hello, Jonathan.
Good morning, Stephen.
Morning to you. Now, so here's the score. Relative dies, you're left the assets in the will, and it's more than 325 grand, because the threshold's 325 grand. In the past, the interest rate, if you could not sell that property, you couldn't get rid of the assets, it was 0%. It's now going to be 3%, 2.5% above base, right?
Yes, it was only, of course, 0% because the Bank of England slashed interest rates over the last 6 months or so. Before that, when interest rates were, shall we say, normal, then there was an interest charged. But so far, correct.
And so what will people now do, especially in this recession, property hard to shift, if a relative dies and they cannot sell a property?
Well, people have been paying interest on late payments of inheritance tax liability over years or decades. I mean, it's been a regular thing. As you say, though, particularly now, in a recession, some might say depression, but let's not go on to that subject. It is not easy to sell property when you want to. The same could be said for getting the right price on shares. I mean, imagine if you'd had bank shares 4 months ago, they'd have been literally 10% of the value of what they were a year and a half ago.
Yeah, but the point surely to focus upon here, Jonathan, is that people choose and can time when they're going to buy bank shares or indeed when they're going to sell them. People can find themselves in a situation, obviously, they cannot dictate when their relative is going to die. When that relative dies, they cannot dictate whether they're being left those assets in a will. And all of a sudden, they could be incurring interest payments and a liability that they haven't even asked for.
Well, I'm not here to talk for the government or the taxman, but tax is tax is tax. Whether it's income tax or capital gains tax or inheritance tax, if you have a tax liability, you have to find the money to pay that liability. And if you don't have it there and then you pay interest, as we now know, on it being overdue. Treat it as actually a relatively low interest rate loan, in a sense. You owe that money.
But in this current market, am I right in saying that you could be left with a property? Let's hypothesize that you're left a property and it takes 2 years to sell. Mm-hmm. You're therefore paying interest for 18 months on an asset that could be continuing to depreciate.
Well, absolutely. I'd like to make a point about inheritance tax and the liability. There is a distinction between property which is inherited and non-property assets. Certainly all liability for IHT has to be paid within 6 months, but property liability can be paid over a 10-year period. Although if you do that, you do have to pay interest on the overdue amount. But it certainly is the case, taking the point you're saying. Clearly, we've had a spring bounce in house prices. We've talked about this on your show many times. If it is the case with the wider economic position that house prices start a downtrend again, then you could find that the value for probate, in other words, to calculate the inheritance tax, is, off the top of my head, say £400,000, but you don't sell it for a year later, by which time the value could be £325,000. You still have to pay tax based on assuming you have received £400,000. Yes, there's no doubt.
Exactly.
In a downturn, it hits people who receive the benefits of estate harder than in an upturn. Absolutely.
Jonathan, nice to talk to you tonight. Thank you very much, Jonathan Davis, Managing Director of Financial Planners Armstrong.